Welcome to the Safe at School Back to School Forum, presented by your American Diabetes Association. First, I want to let everyone know this program is being recorded and the link will soon be available on ADA's website and on social media. Second, the information you are about to hear today does not constitute legal or medical advice. If you are seeking legal or medical advice, please contact a licensed healthcare professional and/or an attorney. I am Crystal Woodward, the director of ADA's award-winning Safe at School campaign, and I am also the parent of a child who is now an adult with type 1 diabetes. So I understand the challenges of preparing to send our children back to school, and it can be a little frightening, a little scary, but we're here to take the fright out of that. Today we're going to talk about the number one issue that's on the minds of parents of children with diabetes right now, which is sending your child back to school. Today's panelists will share their expertise and provide guidance on how parents, schools, diabetes providers can work together to provide a safe and healthy learning environment for our kids. The association encourages parents, schools, providers, policymakers, and other stakeholders to approach the upcoming school year, understanding the rights of children with diabetes and best practices in the school setting. Together, we can make sure our children with diabetes are medically safe at school and treated fairly. As we proceed through today's program, please type your questions in the chat box, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the chat, and we'll follow up later on the remaining questions. Thanks to Xeris for its support of Safe at School and our revised school guide that will be available soon. And I thank you all for joining today. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Tracy Carter, MA-RN, CDCES. Hi, Tracy. Is a diabetes nurse educator at Walter Reed National Medical Center and proudly volunteers with the Virginia Diabetes Council Diabetes in Schools Learns grant team. Kelly Driver, hi Kelly, BSN RN NCSN is a school nurse consultant and diabetes resource nurse for Douglas County School District in Colorado. She's a team consultant for the Diabetes Resource Nurses of Colorado, Inc., and a former chairperson for the Colorado KidsWithDiabetes.org website. She is a past board member of the Colorado Association of School Nurses. Karen Harriman, hi Karen, FNP, BC, MSN, CDCES, is a former family nurse practitioner with Pediatric Specialist of Virginia, with over 40 years of diabetes-related experience, and serves as co-chair for the American Diabetes Association Safe at School Working Group. Jacqueline McMiniman, RN, BSN, CDCES, hi Jackie, works for the Fairfax County Health Department as an assistant nurse manager for the Health Services Division. Additionally, Jackie has served as the chair of the Virginia Diabetes Council Schools Committee since 2019, and Jackie is a new member of ADA's Safe at School Working Group. Dr. Henry Rodriguez, hi Henry, is currently the co-chair of ADA's Safe at School Working Group and is Professor of Pediatrics and Health Information at the University of South Florida and Clinical Director of the USF Diabetes and Endocrinology Center. Leah Wyckoff, MS, BSN, RN, NCSNE, hi Leah, is a school nurse consultant for the Barbara Davis Center for Diabetes at the University of Colorado, a team consultant for the Diabetes Resource Nurses of Colorado, Inc., and Colorado KidsWithDiabetes.org website. Leah is a retired diabetes nurse educator, a retired school nurse, and child care health consultant, and a member of the American Diabetes Association Safe at School Working Group. Welcome, panelists. It's great having you today. Thanks for being here. So the way we're going to format this is that we will be asking questions to each of our panelists who will provide an answer, and others will chime in. And then at the end of the program, we'll be glad to answer as many questions as possible that you type into the chat box. So Tracy, the first question is for you. What is the diabetes provider's role in making sure children with diabetes have everything they need to manage their diabetes at school and to safely participate in all school-sponsored activities?
Hi, Crystal. Thank you. Well, there are many parts to this answer, that's for sure. From the whole perspective of the healthcare team, I think from pediatric endocrinologist team, diabetes educators, and other specialists that help take care of the child and the whole family, really, to make sure that they're ready to go back to school safely and to make sure that that form is filled out completely. I really think that it is the fine tuning of their diabetes care at every follow-up visit. So hopefully we're seeing them regularly throughout the school year and through the summer, getting them ready for that back to school season. And so that we know that family and we know what their needs are and their skill levels are, so that we know that that form is filled out to the best of our ability. And especially that section 6 where the doses are being put in. But there's a lot of questions on there that the whole healthcare team would be, remiss if we weren't really, establishing a great relationship with that family and being able to know that we're confident in signing those forms and getting that family ready. So we want to make certain that the families have the resources also to help transition, to have a proper expectation for the care of their child in the school setting, that they have the supplies they need, they have the prescriptions they need to bring those supplies into the school setting, and that the DMMP does a really great job of addressing all those needs, and that the families can work with the school staff to meet the standard of care so that they're safe, which is the most important thing while they're in the school setting. And so overall, I'd say having established regular follow-up with the families and the children, establishing a great relationship is essential, and making sure that they're getting the information they need and that we're getting the information we need to complete that DMMP form accurately.
Does anyone have anything to add?
I guess I just add that it is, as Tracy's mentioned, I mean, it really is a team effort. And, as providers, there's a major responsibility to get the word out, to get that DMMP completed so that parents have that available to bring to the school and schedule their 504 meetings and so forth. We here in Florida are, we have students that are going to be starting in the next week and a half. And, we typically in our office, and I think I can probably speak to everybody, there tends to be a tsunami of requests for these, despite the fact that we've been trying to communicate to families even at the end of last year's term to try and get the forms done ahead of time. So, time is urgent and you want to have that in place, and we want to be able to complete them. So I guess that's a request.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Henry. Our next question is for Karen. What is a diabetes medical management plan, or DMMP, and how is it used by the school to provide diabetes care? And then when should parents and guardians schedule an appointment with their child's diabetes provider to complete the DMMP?
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you, and welcome to everybody on this call today. First of all, I'm going to answer the second part and ditto with Dr. Rodriguez as far as getting that form done as soon as possible. Usually in our office, we had started in May, and it just takes a lot of time to get them completed. And you need to have those before you go back to school. I know a lot of children aren't able to get back, But maybe I should really start back over again in terms of what is this lovely DMMP that everybody is talking about. So it's the Diabetes Medical Management Plan is what those letters stand for. And as you know, each child is so different in terms of their needs for providing diabetes care in the school setting. You know, you've got your very independent children, you've got a lot of technology going on, and then you've got the children newly diagnosed or your little ones that are going to require a lot of care. So the DMMP has done such a good job of customizing that care for that student with diabetes. So Crystal has sent out a link to our new diabetes medical management form that we, with the Safe at School Committee, has spent a lot of time and energy of updating and making it more user-friendly. And we're really excited about it to customize the care. It also does a really good job of breaking down, again, that community between the family, the healthcare providers, and the school working together, providing the care. So what I would also like to say, and just getting into a little bit more details, on that website at the ADA, they had a really good handout calling Getting Started with New Diabetes Medical Management Plan. I'll show you this right here. But it really outlines everybody in this community as far as what our responsibilities are. Parents, you'll see that they need to initiate getting that new DMMP done every school year, to giving input. And the exciting part right now is that we made it very clear on this new form. For example, sections 1 through 5 is for them to give input in terms of the diabetes. You know, they know their child better than anybody to be able to customize what's needed for that. The rest of the sections 6 through 9, are going to be the healthcare providers' input, as well as reviewing what the family had done, had filled out also. Then you'll also see that there's places on that form that both the provider and the family need to sign before it goes back, it goes to school. And for the school nurse, for the schools to be able to go ahead and provide the care that's needed. So again, it's the whole community's way of making it clear of what is needed. Please, anybody else, if you want to jump in there, please add to it.
Thank you, Karen.
Sure.
That was great. Great explanation and laying out the DMMP. So Jackie, when is it not safe to send a child with diabetes home on the school bus?
Thanks, Crystal, for this question. I know that this can be a real tough one, both for our school and our parent community. And generally speaking, if a student is experiencing hyperglycemia and is symptomatic, so meaning they're complaining of a stomach ache or nausea or showing those signs of extreme thirst, that student should not be sent home on the school bus. Okay. Then conversely, if the student is experiencing hypoglycemia, so the blood sugar under 100, or under 70, we would want to consider, not putting that student on the school bus until the blood sugar is in that safe range. The new DMMP does speak to those hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia limits nicely. And then for hypoglycemia, when we would want to put them on the bus would be if it's over that 80, if you're using those default settings. One thing that I encourage my parents to do, the parents in the schools that I work for, is to consider building in a pre-dismissal blood sugar check, probably 20 minutes or so before the end of the school day. That way we could capture those potential, hypoglycemias and not cause the student to not be able to then get on the school bus and impact the parent by having to have them come to the school, to pick the student up. So I think that that's really a nice way of just doing that double check, whether it's taking a peek at the CGM or doing a blood glucose check, depending on what the student has, before dismissal, maybe 20 minutes or so before the end of the school day. And the DMMP does allow for that as well.
Anyone else do this pre-dismissal blood glucose checks? I think that's a fabulous practice.
I implemented in Colorado and a huge advocate for it, even if parents are picking up their student. I know that parents get worried when their children are missing classroom time. But if you've ever been in a school, those last 20 minutes are getting backpacks together and there's a lot of movement typically in the classes. So the student may just, be buzzing by, can tell a teacher, go to the health room, that kind of thing. But we do implement that in Douglas County, and I advocate it throughout the state because then staff knows how the student did during the day and they're able to send them home safely.
Thank you.
Another consideration is that a child may be going to a childcare setting after school. And so there again, doing that pre-end of school check is good as a transition to another setting. So I think it's important for not only the bus, but they may be going to an in-house childcare setting, being picked up by a caregiver, being picked up by a van that takes them to another, a childcare setting. So I think it's very important for that as well.
And that after school activity, maybe even, sports and what have you, and that becomes even more important. So yeah, absolutely. Good thing to do.
All excellent points. Thank you. Okay, our next question is for Kelly. How do we plan for PE? With snacks or less insulin?
So we do kind of a combination of things. So let's just talk about the student that is on injections. To accommodate, and our PE schedules where we have can be 3 weeks in a row, and then we alternate to music. There's no consistency on how that's provided. So number one, we test depending on when the student has PE, before or after. So if they have PE first thing in the morning, parents have typically set them up for success and we're good to go, but they may not make it to lunch. So we may test the student after PE. So on the DMMP, on that section 1 for demographics, that's why it's so important that we ask all those questions that says physical activity. When do you have gym? What is your child's schedule? So it's crucial to have that information. So if they're on injections, in Colorado, we work with Barbara Davis Center, and they've said that 150 is kind of a great place to start. So if we have a blood sugar of 150 or less, in a conversation with the parent, because this is all a collaborative effort to make the student be successful, we may say they may need a little supportive snack to get them through PE. If they're above 150, they won't need anything. So parent kind of picks that target number that says, I know that my child will be safe at this level, or I want them to have a supported snack without insulin to go and enjoy gym, because we have every level of activity from very not aggressive, but assertive play to pretty quiet. On our pumps, our technology is becoming incredible. And so we're advocating that the nurses, and we're training our, what we call our UAPs, our unlicensed assistive personnel, to assist the student and go in and maybe put that pump into activity mode, if that's one of them, or because it's just the click of a button just to help that child get through and slow that insulin down. So yes, we use food sometimes to support them through PE, And sometimes we do decrease that insulin intake with our pumps because they become so amazing that we can put on those activity modes so that they can enjoy and be a kid.
Thank you, Kelly. Anyone else want to add to that?
I want to jump in there and just say to Kelly, that was really a good overview too on the DMMP. I'm going to have people refer to section 7. At the end of that section 7, there's a really good guidelines in terms of how to make adjustments with exercise and PE at school. So hopefully that will help everybody too.
Thank you, Karen. Our next question is for Dr. Rodriguez. When is glucagon used in the school setting? And what types of glucagon are now available? And should training be provided to designated school staff on all glucagon products?
Mute. You knew one of us had to have a problem with muting, so apologies. I felt I had to do that for the whole group. So yeah, it's a really important question and something that I think both parents and school personnel are very, very interested in. And to Karen's point with regards to DMMP, it's on page 5 in section 8. I guess I have to start with really, our goal is not to have glucagon. So in section 7, it really has to do with prevention of hypoglycemia. So addressing those situations where it's likely to occur. But despite everybody's best efforts, we need to be prepared for when a child might need glucagon. And quite simply, it's for the student with diabetes on insulin that's experiencing a severe low blood sugar, when they're unable to provide self-care and they're not able to take a rapid acting carbohydrate by mouth without risk of choking. And so that's when you want to provide that glucagon, and that rapid acting that you would use otherwise if they're actually conscious and able to participate might be juice, it might be soda, it might be glucose tabs and so forth. But if they're not able to really ingest those with really safety and without the possibility of choking, you want to use that glucagon. And there are currently 3 injectable forms. I think many people are familiar with the red or orange box. That's a glucagon preparation that requires that the powdered glucagon be suspended in the liquid that's in a syringe. It needs to be drawn up and administered to the child in a muscle. There are now, thankfully, other preparations that include a pre-mixed syringe. There's also a pre-mixed auto-injector that I think many people are probably familiar with, similar to an EpiPen. And I think training should be provided for all the forms. Children may have one, they may have the other. Every child might have a different product, and there are a few, but there's a limited number. And I think it's very important that all the school staff be able to respond effectively if a child has a severe low blood sugar and really isn't able to respond to kind of the traditional oral treatments.
And there's also a nasal glucagon, right?
Correct. I am so sorry, backseating. Correct. So that is one that really requires, I guess, minimal training. And sorry, I omitted that. Apologies.
Anyone want to chime in?
Yeah, I'm curious about when you are comfortable with the child carrying it in the backpack. I get that a lot. In middle school, high school, they just keep it on them, or do they have to keep it in that health room?
That's a really good point. The recommendation is that the child have it readily available. If someone has to traipse clear across campus or the school to get that, that's going to be a problem. The other thing I neglected to mention, no matter which form of glucagon you use, a potential side effect of glucagon is nausea. That child may vomit. So if that student is administered glucagon, you want to make sure you lay them on their side. You observe them closely. That glucagon should raise their blood sugar, and they should become conscious within about 10 or 15 minutes. So sometimes even sooner, but having them on their side, observing them, making sure that they're not on their back where they may vomit and choke. We definitely want to avoid that.
And I just want to
Congress-
add that I think that it's real important to have a conversation with your school nurse on where that glucagon would be best housed, because in my middle schools, we don't have lockers and every child has a backpack. And when you say it's in the black backpack, there are quite a few black backpacks. And so be sure to just have a conversation with your school nurse on what works best to get that glucagon to the student as fast as possible. And I always say, it's the training I give you that I hope you never have to use.
Thank you, Kelly. Our next question is for Leah. Leah, which school staff should receive diabetes training? And are there different levels of training for various school staff members?
Great question. Training really is the foundation for the student to have a safe experience at school. And the best approach is to do a tiered training model. So there are 3 tiers in the model that I'm going to discuss, and this is in the ADA school guide, which is on the website. And the first tier is really for all school staff. And no matter what their position, this could be everywhere from the secretary, the principal, the custodian, just all security, all school staff would have a basic overview of diabetes, know why a child would be on insulin, what are the side effects, with emphasis on hypoglycemia and what they would do if they saw symptoms of hypoglycemia in a child with type 1. Also, they need to know little things like children with type 1 may be out of the classroom, and while when other students would be in the classroom, they may need to go to the restroom, they may need to go and get supplies. They may carry their phones with them because the phones are, a part of the CGMs. And so they need to know these little things, these nuances about a child with diabetes. The second tier is for your people that have more direct responsibility for a student. That would include all of your teachers and maybe assistants on the playground. And they would get maybe a little bit more information on what about diabetes and insulin management, about pumps and needles, but mostly their biggest responsibility is going to be what to do if they hear an alarm or they see a child having low symptoms. They may be responsible for giving some glucose tablets and calling for help and that sort of thing. And finally, your third tier is for those people that would be responsible for giving insulin and or glucagon. These will be your health assistants that maybe have been delegated to. They could be the people that go on the field trips or do the after school activities. So they would have the highest level of responsibility and the highest level of supervision as well.
Thanks, Leah. I just want to ask a follow-up question. So who usually does this training, and what types of resources are out there, both in terms of trainers and training materials, such as we were talking earlier about glucagon training kits. Where to go for these resources and where to go to find trainers to help the school nurse?
Oh, yes. Okay, so for resources, the ADA on the website has great resources, and that will be with that school guide as well. And so who would do it? Let me just talk about that. That could be either the school nurse, it may be along with the parent may be able to help. And we may have diabetes educators out there that are helping with this. It could be a variety of people. If you have a school nurse, they will generally be orchestrating this, making sure it occurs. And there are many resources. The ADA has modules, Safe at School modules, that are a great resource. They're both PowerPoints and video clips that really give good examples for them. And the insulin pump manufacturers, most of them have simulators that can be put on phones that really truly do a great job of simulating the operation of pumps. Your providers for insulin and glucagon, they have training materials, and you can actually get some trainers, for example, on the glucagons. If you go to the individual websites for the glucagon, there will be places to click and get trainers for that. There are a lot of great resources out there.
Thank you, Leah. A question I get lots of times at this, especially this time of school, of summer, when kids are getting ready to go back to school, is what can parents do? What should they do to make sure their children receive the care they need at school and have access to all school-sponsored activities? And it really starts with that diabetes medical management plan, or the DMMP, that we've been talking about during this program. So parents, if you haven't yet set up an appointment with your child's diabetes provider to complete the DMMP, please do that. We're getting toward the end of July. Some schools are starting, I understand, next week. Next week is August. So that is the first step. And then once you get that DMMP completed, sit down with your school nurse to go through the DMMP. And the school nurse will create a roadmap for the implementation of the DMMP. And we haven't talked about it yet during this session, but another first step, if your child doesn't already have one, the next step would be for the parent to reach out to the school's 504 coordinator to develop a 504 plan. And that 504 plan is a legal agreement between the parent and the school as to what kinds of accommodations, modifications, services will be provided to your child. And I often get a couple questions. One is, if my child has a DMMP, isn't that the same as a 504 plan? Does my child really need the 504 plan if we have the DMMP? And my answer to that is absolutely positively yes. The DMMP addresses the actual diabetes prescription or regimen in the school setting, where the 504 plan is really the implementation piece for the DMMP, and also addresses academic accommodations, such as your child having the ability to take a spelling or math test at an alternate time if he or she is experiencing hypo or hyperglycemia. Also, you want to make sure that your school nurse, the school, the clinic has all the supplies needed, and figure out what supplies your child is going to carry, and the level of independence of your child, and go from there. But those are just a few first steps, and you can get more information about what to do before returning to school at diabetes/safe at school. So be sure to take a look at our website. Does anybody want to chime in?
Can I add also just some experience clinically this summer with the new DMMP form? The fact that it is a fillable PDF has been a really great experience for us, because we do have, in my clinic setting anyway, we have the option for private online email system. So the families can fill in the fillable PDF for the DMMP form and send it to our clinic ahead of time, so the doctors can review it. And if there's been a recent appointment, they can fill it in like a virtual appointment and send it back on that private email also, so that If there isn't time to get an appointment in person before first day of school, we can create virtual visits that way, and make sure everything's up and running, especially with the way technology is sharing now with Dexcom and the pumps, and just, updating us on, are these still safe, doses? Yes, yes, yes. And they have, already filled out the forms. We know this family, they have a recent visit. We feel safe with these forms. We're able to get it back to them, and it's all electronic. Thank you very much. And now, I learned from the school nurses, like Jackie, who tells us that they're accepting the electronic signature on the form also, so we don't have to physically print the form, sign it the old-fashioned way, scan, fax, blah, blah, blah. It's all electronic now. It's working really, really well that way. Yes, I'm still going to panic the day before school, but it has gone much smoother this summer with this option. And I don't know that I can vouch for every clinic everywhere in the whole country, but I can say that ours, we're implementing this practice and it's gone well. And I hope that, we'll just gradually work out the kinks and everything will, it's a good model, I think, going forward. And so I hope that we'll start to see that more in electronic medical records too, that it'll just integrate much easier that way. So thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Crystal, I don't know if Karen was going to jump in on this one, but the other thing I'll put in a plug-in for this form is that it's intentionally structured so that if there are subsequent dose changes throughout the year, page 4 has it's really freestanding with regards to the insulin dosing. So if later on in the school year, the student requires insulin dose changes, that the provider can just complete page 4 and sign it and communicate it to the school without the family, the providers, the school going through an entirely new form.
Thank you. Okay. All right. We're going to go back to Karen. How are the carb ratio and correction factor totals used together? And should I round up or down on the insulin dosing?
All right, now we get into the nitty gritties of this lovely form. And maybe I'll get everybody to do maybe a little math skills while they're at it. But so what I'm going to do is refer you to page 4, and we're also going to talk about page 3 too. So back to just the simply the dose determination, you first look at the amount of carbs the child is going to eat before the meal. And oftentimes that is sent with a parent, or the school works with their cafeteria system to determine the amount of carbs, but that should be readily available to families, through their school. So simply they are going to figure out what's going to be, what they're going to eat. They're going to use the insulin carb ratio that has been determined. And as Dr. Rodriguez said, it oftentimes does change throughout the school year, but that'll start off the year. And then they're going to go ahead and look at, due to high blood sugars, adding on what we call a correction dose. And this is just simply trying to get their blood sugar back to their target range. And once those are determined, then we're going to look at adding the two together, and that will be the dose that's given. And this would be more of those that are on insulin pens, syringes. A lot of the pumps now are doing a lot of the math, but I thought maybe what I'll do is do a little quick example, especially with this rounding part. And you know what, before I leave that page on the dosing table, as you will see, this is quite comprehensive so that it can really customize, again, the student's schedule, depending on when they eat lunch, if they need snacks, when their PE is, if they're staying over, if they're on a field trip, for 24 hours. We've got lots of ways to help customize whatever's possible for that student's life, and helping them with their learning and activities. So let me just give you a quick example. So a child is on a 1 to 10 insulin carb ratio. They are having 50 carbs in their meal. So 10 into 50 is a dose of 5. Now, let's go ahead and say their blood sugar is 190 and their target is 130. All right, so, well, I'm going to make this harder so I can do the rounding. Let's say their blood sugar is 150 and their target is 130. So if you do that math, you end up 150 minus 130, you get 20. And you're dividing it with a correction of 1, let's say in this case, a 1 to 30. All right, so when you do that math, you're going to get a 0.66. And so I want to now refer you. So we've got 5 units for the carbs, and now we're going to go to the correction. So as you can see on page 3 in that section about insulin administration guidelines, as you come near the end, there's for injections, calculate insulin dose to the nearest. So this is really going to be if a child has the ability to give a half unit, i.e. in a syringe or in an insulin pen, do you go ahead, and if they did have that ability, they could go ahead and round to a half of a unit. If that 0.66 was used with a way of administration with a total unit mechanism, then they would round up because it's over 0.5 to a whole unit. Now, I hope I didn't confuse everybody, but that's just simply this whole rounding and looking at what tools are available to that child and making sure that the person that's helping that child with insulin understands those kind of guidelines.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks
Sure.
a lot. We'll move on to Jackie. What is the process for determining when a student is capable of self-management at school?
Thanks, Crystal. I think this one is such a great question. And this is a collaborative answer. So I think we have multiple things to consider from, a collaborative decision between the student, the parents, the physician office, as well as the school. And the nice feature of that new ADA DMMP is that section 3 is totally devoted to those self-management skills. So we're looking at what level of support does the child need to perform the different diabetes care tasks, whether they need full support, whether they need some supervision, or whether they're independent and don't need any assistance. And I think that, in the school setting and from my experience, if the student is showing an increased interest in wanting to do the tasks, that's when I talk with the parent about this. Johnny is really expressing that he wants to try to give his injections himself. And I just kind of open it up with the parent with, what do you think about this? What's he doing at home? And now that the new DMMP section 3 can be changed by the parent, that conversation and a change to the form, and we can make that happen in the school setting. I think there's a lot of factors behind it, though. Some students just don't show that interest. And so it's not our role as the school nurse to push a student in a direction that they're not ready for. But certainly we want to cultivate their independence. And if they're ready and are showing that interest, we definitely help steer them in that direction for sure.
Thank you, Jackie. Kelly, do you recommend that students share about their diabetes with other students? If so, what is the most useful information that should be shared to give students support and confidence?
So it has been my experience that if students are willing to share, it increases their safety net. And so depending on the level of sharing and the age of the student, to me, the student needs to be incorporated into that conversation. My preschoolers, the safety net is pretty much built in because the parents want all of their school personnel to be aware of how to care for the student. But as they move into kindergarten and first grade and on up into elementary, I have some students that don't want to share. And we have a conversation about, so who would be your buddy at school? And could we have a couple of buddies so that when you're on the playground and you don't feel well? I think it is so important that they have people that care about them and want to advocate for them. Because when a student with diabetes is compromised, they need others to help support them to get them assistance. I have done everything from present with the student in front of the classroom because they wanted everybody to know. I had one that wanted the whole school to know. And so we worked with the principal and had a little diabetes education for an assembly. And education is always a great thing. It empowers us. It lets us, it helps us to have a bigger perspective. I do have middle schoolers that don't want anyone to know, and I just work with them to say, let's have a few confident, some friends that would not share the information that you can rely upon, so that if you weren't feeling well and you had a substitute and the substitute didn't understand, that your friend could advocate for you and say, they really do need support now. And in the high school setting, I've done groups. We have what we call a safety net lunch, and they bring a couple of buddies, and we talk about how to keep their friends safe in their extracurricular activities, in their classrooms, in the halls, because they're out and about quite a bit. So I think that it's really important to at least have a safety net. And I advocate that parents make sure we're not with them every single day. They grow up, they want to become more independent, and we need to make sure they have a safety net, whether you have a student with diabetes or just your other children.
Thank you, Kelly. And then we have one final question before we get to some of the audience questions. And this question is for Dr. Rodriguez. What are the circumstances under which correction doses should be given outside of meal times as per the student's DMMP?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the insulin dosing information, as we've talked about, is on page 4, that's section 6A. And then there's on page 6 in section 9, there's a specific section that talks about high glucose management. And so really our recommendation is that students be permitted to correct with a minimum interval, typically of 2 to 3 hours between their insulin dosing, whether it's for correction or eating. And it really is becoming increasingly important with really the nearly universal use of multiple daily injections. So, typically our patients or students are using a flat basal insulin that kind of keeps them steady at wherever they're at. But the rapid acting insulin that they're using at mealtime or to bring their blood sugar down is only effective for about 3 or 4 hours. And so if they're still elevated, and for example, they have maybe lunch at 10:30 in the morning, and they're still high a couple of hours, 3 hours later, do you really want them to be high the remainder of the school day? So I think that's incredibly important, certainly for patients that are on insulin pumps. It's very important if they have a problem with their pump or their infusion set and they're not getting any further insulin, they don't have a long-acting insulin in the background, so their blood sugar won't stay high. It's even going to go even higher and then become ill. And so I think within the diabetes medical management plan, there are instructions, obviously, that's subject to local policies and potential restrictions, but we really do advocate for the students to be able to correct their blood sugar if it's high and not have to spend, the major part of their school day feeling poorly, maybe not being able to perform as well academically because their blood sugar might be high.
Thank you, Henry. Now we do have a few questions in the chat box that let's see how many we can answer. I want to make sure I understand we should have the DMMP completed and then bring this with us when developing a 504 for our T1 child. And I'll just go ahead and answer that and say yes. Yes, we want the diabetes medical management plan is the foundation for the Section 504. It's the foundation for the school nurses' individualized healthcare plan. So you do want to have that done before the beginning of the school year, and have that available when you're beginning the 504 process. Let's see what else we have. What about training bus drivers and providing emergency supplies for them as well? Who would like to comment on that?
I can comment on that, Crystal.
Yeah.
So I think training bus drivers, absolutely. And one thing we do in our district is when we know that one of our students with diabetes is riding a school bus, those bus drivers do have to do our level 1 and 2 training. Those levels that Leah talked about, we have copied the ADA's levels as well, so that the bus drivers have that awareness. And then in terms of emergency supplies for the bus, if the student is self-carrying their emergency supplies on the school bus, then we train those bus drivers and substitute bus drivers to be able to administer that emergency glucagon for the student. If the student isn't self-carrying their emergency supplies, emergency medication on the bus, then we do not train the bus drivers because we do not have stock emergency meds on the school buses. But absolutely, bus drivers should be trained and have that awareness.
Thank you, Jackie. We have a teen whose mother works at the high school her daughter attends. Mom wants to totally manage her daughter's diabetes without the nurse being involved. What is the school nurse's role in this situation?
So I will put in my 2 cents and please others. So it's always a collaborative effort to keep these children safe. And there are some needs of mom and of student. When I have had this situation, I have spoken to mom and said, so what is our plan if you are ill and cannot come to school? Does that mean that your daughter does not come to school? And that would not be, that would impact her education. So I kind of try to say there will be some scenarios where you may not be able to be in attendance, and how are we going to keep your daughter safe? So I would kind of start there, and then I just make a friend and see where does mom feel like she's threatened, that has to be in control of everything. And maybe if the child's a teen, she may want to move into a self-management plan, so that we can kind of see how this young person is starting to manage her own being a teenager. So that's kind of how we go about it. But these are delicate, and it's hard to release your child when they have a chronic illness like this. And so I'm hoping that all parties will have a lot of grace.
Thanks, Kelly. For glucagon at school, I'm guessing that it's kept in the nurse's office. Does it ever go in a 504 that the child keeps it with them?
Yes. Anybody disagree?
No. Okay. Let's see.
The one thing I guess about glucagon too is that darn backpack when the weather is really, really hot. And the temperature on, with that glucagon, that's just one consideration.
It's a good point, Karen.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. I'm terrified to send my son back to school. He was diagnosed June 10th, and his numbers are still all over the place. We don't have a pump. I opted to do online school for the first semester until we can get a pump, or at least a little more time. Plus, it's a new school. I don't know the staff and nurse, and school started yesterday. Any thoughts on that?
I'd love to answer that question, Crystal. I've worked with a lot of families from diagnosis, and I appreciate this fear and the unknown that she's expressing. I think the first thing is, take this time that while he's doing online, and get to know the school nurse, get to know the administration, and who would be his teacher. Once you wanted to go back to school. And also, I think you can maybe work out with the school nurse and the school to allow him to do some activities with the school. Do they have a band program, a music program, or could he come into art class or something where you can ease him in? The basic, what's going to really, I think, help ease you is to be a part of the whole process. You can ask the school nurse and say, I'd love to be a part when you start training. And then as a parent, when you hear what she is teaching and even, collaborate with the school nurse and say, oh, he specifically gets sweat on his nose when he goes low, or you can give them little details that really enhance what she's teaching. Then I think you will be able to have more confidence sending him to school.
Thanks, Leah. And we're going to try to, as hard as we can to get a couple more questions in. We have more questions that are coming in all the time. So our district policy insists school clinic personnel finger poke to check blood glucose. Our 8-year-old daughter, diagnosed 11 months ago, has a Dexcom G6, which does not require frequent finger pokes. They finger poked all last year, even with the Dexcom. How can we get our district on board with not requiring all the pokes? She will also be getting the Omnipod 5 in the next month or two, making finger pokes even less necessary. All of this to say finger pokes are of course acceptable if her reading doesn't seem to match how she currently feels or acts. Some comment on this? Anyone want to comment?
Well, oh, go ahead, Henry.
Well, I was just going to say, so again, this is where the DMMP is really, really helpful. So on the bottom of page 2 is a section specifically addressing glucose monitoring at school. There's no question, as been mentioned before, the technology is rapidly advancing. In the early days of CGM, we had to do finger pokes to calibrate the devices. We all now feel so comfortable with these devices that, as she's mentioned, the Omnipod 5 system is one example where the continuous glucose monitor is actually providing information that the pump is then utilizing to adjust insulin delivery. So, again, work with your diabetes healthcare provider, making sure it's in the DMMP, meeting with the school staff to review expectations. And then, it's going to be a dialogue, but I think, everybody in attendance, I think, would agree that it's reasonable for your child not to have to utilize finger pokes for all of their glucose management. There's, again, on the bottom of that page, number 2, there's even parameters for when a finger poke would be appropriate.
I would add, Henry, that this sounds like it may be that someone doesn't have either experience with a CGM or has had a long history where CGMs were, new on the horizon, whereas now CGMs can be more accurate than blood glucose meters. There's a lot of resources for a school nurse in the Journal of School Health. In the past couple of years, there's been articles about CGM and how to use it appropriately. The ADA has a CGM guidance document online, and to use that as well. Yes, just educating people on how far CGMs has come is really important.
And I just like to add that Dexcom, a lot of the reps that I have met are more than willing to go and help educate, and nurses are usually lifelong learners. And it sounds like just a lack of education, I think, Leah.
I agree. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. So unfortunately, we're coming up on the end of our time. We want to thank everyone for attending ADA Safe at School Back to School panel discussion. We hope the guidance and information provided has been helpful to everyone as we continue working together to make sure students with diabetes are medically safe at school and treated fairly. I also want to thank our dedicated and knowledgeable panelists for sharing their expertise and time today. Please know your American Diabetes Association is here for you. A link to this panel discussion will soon be available on ADA's website and also on social media. If you'd like to watch it again or share it with your colleagues, parents, and others who may be interested. For more information and for specific recommendations, please go to our website at diabetes.org/safe-at-school. And again, many thanks to Xeris for its support of Safe at School and for our upcoming updated school guide. We're real excited for some of the new resources that are going to be coming down the pike soon. So thanks, everyone. Have a successful school year and a great day. Thank you.